and welcome back to the Econobox garage where we continue with our Bugeye build. Well, I'm getting very close now. Bonnet latch is all done. Interior is all done. I just have some adjustments to do with the heat gun and that to get the seats where I'd really like to have them. Got a couple of bulbs to fix up in the dashboard. So what I'm going to do next is fill the rear end, or fill the differential, fill the engine with oil, put some water in the radiator, and bleed the clutch and brakes. And as you can see, I erased everything that was on there before because it was all checked off, and now I just added a new punch list going forward on preparation for startup and its first drive. So some of the things I've already done: there's fuel in the tank, gearbox has got oil in it, static timing's been set. So there's all kinds of different little things that I've got to do, and if I think of more, I will definitely add them on here. You may have noticed that I don't have the headlight trim rings on. I've left them off because I still have to aim the headlights, and can't do that until I can turn them on, which means I have to hook up the battery, check the wiring, and then check all the lights, make sure they work, and the switches. But now it's time to stop talking and get to work. So one of the things I need to do at the back here is fill the differential. So there's the fill plug, and there's the drain plug. I'm just going to make sure that that drain plug is tight, and I'll take this out, basically fill this up until the fluid just starts to come out the bottom of the hole. Now there are also a number of grease fittings back here on the handbrake linkage. You can see one grease fitting here, and there are a bunch of other ones. You can see one right about there, right in the middle of your picture. And so we'll do all the work at the back here with bleeding the brakes. You can see the bleed screw here on this side, same on the other side. And I've already have petrol in the tank. I've tightened up the hoses on the fuel pump, so that part's all ready to go. But so I'll make sure this plug is tight. I will take this one out, and I got to figure out how I'm going to get the fluid, the brake gear oil, into that hole without making a big mess. Well, I was wondering how I was going to get the gear oil into the differential, but the bottle, the Penrite product that I'm using, comes with this neat little basically nozzle that's quite flexible. So I'll be able to get the bottle up above and just unscrew this cap. That'll just fit inside the fill hole, and I can just squeeze the gear oil out that way. I have the drain plug tightened up, and I have the fill plug taken out. So let's get underneath the car, grab a couple of rags and a bucket just to put underneath just in case, and we'll go and put the gear oil in. And I'm using a Penrite Mild EP gear oil. I was recommended by my supplier up in Edmonton, and I'll put a link to that supplier in the description below. Well, while I'm working on the back of the car, I may as well get under there with my grease gun. This is one that I've had around for many years, and to be honest, I can't remember what kind of grease I've got in there, but I'm sure it'll be fine for the Bugeye here. So I'm going to grease the fittings on the e-brake or parking brake, and whatever other fittings are on the back side here. Well, I'm adding oil to the engine. I've got it almost to our limit, but one other thing to do before you start the engine is to prime the oil pump. Now, the idea with this is, and I've already loosened this off, is you disconnect the feed line to the oil filter housing from here, and then pour oil down in there, and then that flows down directly into the oil pump. Because what can happen is if the oil pump doesn't start picking up right away, the engine will turn over, the oil pump will turn over, but there'll be no oil in it, so it doesn't suck any oil up from the oil pan. Now I have the differential full. I've added oil to the engine. Next thing I'm going to look at is adding oil to the dashpots on the carburetors. So this is the little plunger that goes in there, and set it aside briefly. If you look down inside in here, there's a little collar right there with the end of the screwdriver. That is the fill level for the dashpot. I'm using Penrite SU damper oil, so I'll just get that in there and just check periodically as I'm doing it. Okay, so I don't know if you can see very well, but the oil is just over that little collar, so I've probably got just a tiny bit too much in there, but I think we'll be fine. So I'll put the plunger back in on that one, and you should feel some resistance as you push that in there, which is a good thing. I'm just going to pull that back out and check the level. And actually, pull it back out and check the level, and it looks, yep, it looks good. So I'll put that back in. And got some good resistance on putting that in. Tighten that up and just repeat the process for the back carb, and those are all ready to go. Okay, now that I have the dashpots filled, next up is to bleed the clutch and bleed the brakes. I'm going to start with the clutch. I've used one of these before and just went to get mine, and it was the top was actually broken, so I went and picked up a new one from the local parts store. And theoretically what this allows you to do is bleed the brakes solo. So the idea is you put some fluid in here, some brake fluid, just enough. There's a little pipe going from this lid down into the bottle. The idea is you just put a little bit of brake fluid in there to cover the end of that, and then the other end of this hose goes onto the bleed screw itself. And the idea being, when you pump the pedal, pushes brake fluid and air through, and it comes out through this hose and blows the bubbles through and sucks fluid back in. So I'm just using some .4 brake fluid, and you can see I've topped up the master cylinder. So now I'm going to put a little bit of fluid in here, hook this hose up, and then I'll start pumping the clutch pedal. Well, you can see now I have a little bit of brake fluid in this bottle, and it has a magnet on it, so that allows me just to put it on the side of there, and there's a little fitting that pushes into the end of the bleed screw, which is loosened off. So now I'm going to get in the car and carefully start pumping the clutch pedal. And while I'm doing this, I'm keeping an eye on the level in the master cylinder here as it goes down. Okay, I'm going to top that up. Now, one thing with brake fluid, you want to be very careful not to get it on any paint. There's no fluid coming through that hose yet. Oh, now we're starting to get somewhere. There we go. Top put some more fluid in the master cylinder. And the pedal's starting to feel a bit firm now. And you can see fluid coming out the Okay, I'm going to give that a few more pumps. You need to make sure this stays topped up, otherwise you end up just pumping air back in to the system. And gotta make sure you don't overfill that little bottle. Alright, I don't see any more air coming out of there. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the cap back on the master cylinder and get my wrench and tighten the bleed screw. And I believe we'll be good to go. There's a little bit of that there. And there. So I've got to get this out of here without spilling brake fluid. There we go. That is the clutch bled. As I mentioned earlier, I picked up a remote bleeder for the clutch from the Bugeye guy. So that's what this is, with the pipe that goes down to the clutch slave cylinder. Makes it way easier to bleed than having to go through that little access patch in the right side footwell. So I'll put a link to that product in the description below for you. Well, I had my son come out and pump the clutch pedal while I checked underneath, and it's all working as it should. So next up is I have just to repeat the process on the brakes, and I'm going to start on the left rear, then I'm going to do the right rear, and then I'm going to move to the left front and then to the right front. So basically start from furthest away to closest to the master cylinder. So this is might take a while. I'm not going to bother filming it because it's pretty straightforward. So I'm not going to bother filming. It's fairly repetitive. So when I come back, hopefully the car will be able to stop. Well, I got the brakes all bled, front and back. I did it yesterday, left it overnight, did come out and discover a leak. And one of the banjo bolts on this caliper here wasn't tight, so I tightened all that up. Then I re-bled it again this morning, and things are good to go. I had learned that it helps to disconnect the park brake linkage when bleeding the brakes, so I did that. So I'll rehook those, and then I'll get under and do all the grease fittings. I've already done the ones on the back. I have to do the front U-joint, which is accessed through the side of the transmission tunnel. And I think there's 4 or 5 on each side at the front that will need to get done. So I'll just get that done, drop it on the ground, put some antifreeze in, and we're just about ready to go. So I'll just show you on one side here where all the grease fittings are in the front end. There's one here for the outer tie rod end. There's one here for the kingpin. There's another one down here for the kingpin. And so that's a total of 1, 2, 3. I thought there was another one. Well, there's those 3. And the 4th one is on the opposite end of the trunnion down here. So I'll get these ones all greased up and then do the same on the other side. Now before I put everything together, I'm going to pull the drums off. I'll give them a clean on the outside and give them a coat of VHT high temperature paint. I'll use the same paint that I used on the front caliper, so that's the silver color. And then once that's done, I have these plugs that go in these holes here. And then when you put the wheel on, here's the inside of the wheel. This hole here, you just go over top of that plug, and that way you can still access the brake adjustment with the wheel on if necessary. Before I button things up on the back here, I just thought I'd show you how the brakes are adjusted without the drum on. Now that little rubber plug in the brake drum plugs a hole that allows you access to this screw right here. So the process with this is you take the screwdriver, put it through the hole into this screw here, and then tighten the brakes until you can't turn it by hand. So once you've got it to that point, you go in and you back it off 1 notch, and that will free it up enough that you can turn the drum by hand. Now of course you have to do this with the handbrake off. So there you go, that's how you adjust your brakes, and you just do the same process on both sides, and you're good to go. Well, it doesn't look a lot different, but there's a coat of paint on there, and this is the paint I used. So it's a VHT high temperature caliper paint. So that's just to keep the drum from rusting, and I've got the plug in, and I'm going to get the wheel and get that bolted on, and I'm going to drop the car down to the ground. Well, that's a wrap for this episode, and we're getting ever closer to getting the first startup. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that supported the channel, either by commenting, subscribing, hitting that super thanks button, and purchasing merchandise such as the shirt I'm wearing. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that, you'll get notified when the next video comes out. And if all goes according to plan, that next video will be the first startup of the Bugeye in over 40 years. If you'd like to get a hold of me directly, you can do so at the email address I'll put at the bottom of the screen, and that will also be in the description below. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.